I think we will start now, and those who are going to join us will be added to the room later on. So first of all, hello, good evening or good afternoon to everyone who has been joining us. This refers both to speakers and to people who are going to listen us and to ask questions to our speakers. This is the third event in the series of which we call here at International Relations Department at LSE as LSE Ukraine series. Within this framework, which is hosted by me, Mariia Zolkina, who is research fellow at International Relations Department at LSE, we focus on the most crucial developments to Ukraine's policy, public policy, referring both to the past, present, and of course, making some recommendations or setting some priorities for policymakers, for decision makers when it comes to the future public policy making in and regarding Ukraine. And today I'm very pleased to open the third event in a row, which will be devoted to crucial and significant and sensitive topic of Ukrainian economics during the war, the resilience of Ukraine itself and global impacts of Russian aggression against Ukraine in general. We all understand that Russian aggression has significantly affected not just regular cooperation between economic actors and political actors in the region, but also affected seriously the global supply chains and economic ties when it comes to global markets. And after 15 months of intensive and large-scale aggression against Ukraine, we have to find out how does it look like when it comes to situation within Ukraine, around Ukraine, and more to a broader extent on the global level, let's say. So today I'm very pleased to introduce three outstanding speakers who will who agreed to participate in this event and elaborate on specific issues within this topic. So let me introduce, first of all, Irina Kose, who is leading a research fellow and project coordinator at the Institute of Economic Research and Policy Consulting. She is a researcher with more than 10 years of professional experience in policy analysis and more than 5 years in organizational project management at Ukrainian think tank Institute for Economic Research. In 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, Irina was also a senior fellow at the Ukraine and Eastern Europe program at Globsec in Slovakia, working on issues regarding economic recovery of Ukraine in the light of Russian aggression. Thank you for joining us today, Irina.
Hello.
Second speaker from Ukraine is Gleb Vyshlinsky, who is Executive Director at the Center for Economic Strategy, a think tank which was established and which is being run by Gleb since 2015. Except for that, Gleb is well-known expert and public policy analyst with more than 20 years of experience in economic analysis and research. And since 2021, Gleb is also a head of board at Hromadske TV, an independent TV broadcaster in Ukraine. Thanks for accepting our invitation and joining us today from Ukraine. And our third speaker is well known for LSE community and British audience, and not only in UK, but internationally, Professor Chris Alden, who is professor in international relations at the London School of Economics. He is director of the biggest foreign policy think tank at LSE, which is called LSE Ideas. Previously, Chris was program head at Global Powers in Africa at South African Institute of International Affairs. He was author and co-author of multiple books and research papers and articles. The latest book, which Chris co-authored with Professor Mendes, was published just recently in January 2023, if I'm not mistaken, and was called China and Latin America, Development, Agency, and Geopolitics. Chris, thank you for being with us today. We're all looking for all this extensive expertise regarding both Ukraine and global impact of crisis caused by Russian aggression against Ukraine. In order to start, let me ask each of you to spend like 2 up to 3 minutes answering short, but at the same time, very comprehensive question. What challenges for Ukraine's economy do you consider to be most crucial in a short-term perspective for 2023 or maybe 2024? If you want to focus on challenges which are directly linked to domestic situation in Ukraine and economic situation in Ukraine, please do that. If you see these challenges in a broader perspective, like for region, in terms of regional or global perspective, you're also welcome to do that. Just please be brief, because this is just the beginning of the discussion. 2-3 challenges in a short-term perspective and 2-3 minutes. Philippe, maybe you will start.
Okay, thank you, Maria. For this year, I believe like 3 challenges are the following. The first one is to fund and to do as much reconstruction as possible. And related to this, like the second challenge is to bring as much refugees back as possible, to create more value added and consumption in Ukraine. And the third one is overcome infrastructural bottlenecks like logistics, electricity, and water supply. But Irina here is the better expert than I am. For the next year, it will be to finance budget deficit with as much foreign grants and concessional loans as possible. The second one is to start using Russian assets in mass for reconstruction, and we need to take into account that we expect additional deoccupied territories where we will need reconstruction. And the third one is to resolve domestic obstacles for investment, issues related to domestic issues and policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. Irina, what do you think will be the most crucial?
Well, I fully agree with Philippe. I would the challenges that he mentioned, that the first challenge for Ukrainian business is the war itself. Clearly, the inability to produce as before, the inability to maintain production cycles, loss of personnel due to migration and due to the warfare, loss of assets, also restrictions on international trade, inability to export, to import products due to first the blockade of seaports by Russia, and second due to bottlenecks at the border at the land routes. And I would add another challenge is with the energy infrastructure. Russian attacks on the Ukrainian energy infrastructure this winter caused a lot of damage. The repairs are ongoing, but still a lot has to be done. A lot of repairs have to be done. And right now we expect that this summer Ukraine will experience some kind of power deficit, because a lot of energy blocks will go under maintenance and repair.
Thank you. Thank you, Irina. Chris, what do you think about the challenges which Ukraine and maybe just globally the markets are facing in the light of Russian invasion for short-term perspective?
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. Of course, I share the concerns raised by colleagues just a moment ago, so I don't want to replicate what they're saying. But I think in a broad sense, the transition from a war economy that has concern of survival to one that is integrated, reintegrated in a way that will help grow the economy, develop it in the right way that it wants to, that brings it back fully into the global supply chains, et cetera. And it's the world that it's going to be re-entering is one that is different from the one before the war started. And it's one where friend sharing, decoupling, the kind of global power competition is manifesting in economic terms. Of course, Ukraine has felt the hard pressure of the military levels of competition, but there's significant global economic competition, and finding a way to reintegrate into that changing environment will be important. And I think a third concern would be a kind of credible strategy as to why foreign investment should come to Ukraine, where the risk, managing the image, the risk, and what have you, so that foreign investors will see opportunities in the Ukrainian scenario, rather than just a sort of, devastated economy. I mean, the narrative out there is one of war. So one has to talk about framing it in a way of reconstruction, so that investors will think this is an opportunity they'd like to participate in the regrowing of the economy.
Thank you, Chris. We will definitely go back to the interests of international actors, their interests and priorities for participation in the reconstruction of Ukraine. That's very important. So thanks for mentioning it. In addition to domestic concerns and challenges which Ukraine is facing now. Now I would like to ask the very basic question, basic for people who are not deep into economic public policy analysis, but still lack of some kind of picture, comprehensive picture, what is going on in terms of Ukrainians' resilience, economic resilience. How does Ukrainian economic and financial system survive? From which sources from which domestic sources we can still fuel the Ukrainian budget, because there might be an impression that Ukrainian economy is fully stopped, while this is not the case. So it still operates to some extent, and still the domestic sources are still important in terms of taxes and other types of channels to fuel the budget. So Gleb, can you please elaborate a bit on how does the main indicators of economic situation in the country look like at this very moment, and what is the balance between how country is directly supported by foreign partners economically, in terms of budgetary support on the one hand, and what can we still take from domestic resources, let's say?
Yes, like according to official statistics, last year Ukrainian GDP fell by approximately 30%, but we need to understand that significant share of this decline was the decline due to the occupation of some territories, and also due to refugees. We estimate the number of refugees in the range of 5 to 6 million Ukrainians, such as approximately like up to 15% of pre-war population. So it means that like if we calculate like GDP per square kilometer of controlled territory or per capita, then like the situation is much better. Like it is like in the range of like -10, -15%. Like for this year, for 2023, we expect, like majority of forecasters expect growth compared to the previous year, while like certainly small growth, as we are in the active stage of military conflict, of the war, and it is like the range of like 2 to 4% of growth this year. So when we look on budget picture, like certainly Ukraine spends a lot on the military. Like for example, in May, 57% of expenditures were on military, plus additional 13% was on law enforcement agencies. That generally brings the total figure of like the total share of financing for military and law enforcement to like 2/3 to 70%. So it is very big. However, like when we certainly it results in a very high budget deficit. that is the range of 20 to 25% of GDP. However, when we look on the picture, how's this, what are the sources of funding for budget expenditures, be it military or peaceful, pre-war expenditure lines. Revenues are approximately 50-50 domestic and foreign loans and grants. So domestic, for example, in May, domestic revenues were 100 billion hryvnias, which is approximately $3 billion US, and foreign financing was $3.3 billion. And on average, in during this year, we received monthly $4 billion US. Monthly foreign funding was $4 billion US, and we expect that the total funding this year will be $43 billion. So the picture is not white, not black, it is mixed, and it means that yes, without the foreign funding, Ukraine will be very hard to defend, as it will resemble pictures of earlier wars of 20th century and before, with hyperinflation, with money printing, with falling living standards and poverty. But on another side, it is not also the picture of the countries that is fully funded by foreign donors. So it has an economy that fell for those territories where there is no fight in approximately by 10 to 15%, where standards of living are lower than they were before the war, but you could not see the signs of real war on the streets of those towns and cities that are not close to the front line. It is closer to pictures that you could see during some financial crises. So with yes, some premises being closed, looking for new new cafes and new shops to take those premises. However, besides air alerts, air defense alerts, and missile and drone attacks by the terrorist state, there is no significant difference in terms of economic reality compared to the crisis time like COVID or global financial crisis 2008, 2009.
Thank you, Flip, especially with these elegant, for these elegant examples, how you can measure actually or distinguish between territories which are under control and the situation there under control of Ukraine and the global, not global, but the nationwide impact when it comes to all the territories. So basically it was important, and I have, for instance, never here in kind of discussions, so only the worst possible numbers of decline, which of course refer to every damage and include every damage which was done to Ukraine. Irina, I know that you have been in all possible details following the expert capacities of Ukraine under the current wartime conditions, and being not a political economist and being just a political scientist working with regional security, I have been, for instance, following your analysis on how Ukraine is surviving in terms of still trying to export goods, both from seaports or using land corridors with the EU member states. I'm all the time inspired by all all the analysis you have been sharing with your followers. So can you please explain to our foreign audience, how is it going with export capacities of Ukraine? What is going on with the so-called grain deal, which Ukraine signed with the United Nations and Turkey last year, and due to which we were allowed actually to have a narrow opportunity to export grain and wheat from 3 Ukrainian seaports. How does economics and politics are interconnected when it comes to the grain deal? Because we all know that every couple of months when we have to renew the operation of this grain deal, we have another set of blackmailing requirements from Russia, and every time we are frightened that this grain deal will not be prolonged. So what is going on with Ukrainian export, both sea export and land one?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Let me start by underlining that sea exports and trade by sea was extremely important for Ukraine before the war. Ukraine exported 62% of its exports by sea, and the exports was worth $42.5 billion. That's the number for 2021. Maritime was the primary mode of transportation for some products. For example, sunflower oil seeds, 96% of the total product exports were exported by sea. Corn, 99%, wheat, 100%, iron ore, 68%, steel products, 96%. So when the war started and Russia started blocking the Ukrainian trade by sea, it had a tremendous impact on the Ukrainian economy. The grain deal that you mentioned, yes, it was signed last year on July 22nd. Then it was later extended for 120 days in November, and another extension was in March for 60 days. And even though it was said that it's 120 days again, and a third extension we saw on May 18th this year for another 60 days. But we can say that the grain deal is not working. First, it's not working as it was agreed on to work. Russia blocked inspections of seas going to and from Ukrainian ports for more than a week. And only recently, I think on June 5th or 6th, the inspections resumed, but the number of inspections per day is very low. It's around 1 or 2 inspections daily instead of like 8 or 10 that are required. And the second point is that even with the Black Sea Grain Initiative, it allows Ukraine only to export some products. It's just the grain products. It doesn't allow Ukraine to export its other products that I mentioned, like iron ore or steel products, and it doesn't allow Ukraine to import at all. So all of that extra volume that Ukraine is not able to export or import has to go through the land border. And of course, those routes were not equipped for that. They don't have capacity, neither the railroads nor just automobile roads. And with the war going for 1.5 years, still it's the capacity hasn't improved much. Yes, the EU is helping Ukraine with its Solidarity Lane program to increase the capacity of those border crossing points and to offer some alternative routes, but it's just so much investment is needed to have a major impact in improving this capacity that right now we don't see that Ukraine can that Ukraine can be able to export all that needs to export just through the land border, unfortunately. And another issue that arose in recent months is the limitations posed by Ukrainian neighbors, by Poland, by Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary on the imports of agricultural products from Ukraine. They say that they are afraid that Ukrainian agricultural products have influence on their domestic prices and affect their farmers. So it was like a decision on the level of the European Union to limit that import, and recently those limitations were extended, I think, till the end of this year. Don't remember the exact date. So this also has it further aggravates the situation and creates lines at the border, additional checks, because these limitations that they require additional checking that the products are not destined to these 5 neighboring countries and they're only for transit. So they require tracking devices, they require additional convoys and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
May I put just one brief follow-up question? In introductory remarks, you mentioned that the energy, the situation in energy sector in Ukraine is also a source of concerns. Can you please elaborate a bit? Because I think after Ukraine survived this winter and altogether the energy sector in Ukraine and critical infrastructure basically survived despite of all these horrible missiles attack. So as of now, it's out of the agenda when it comes to especially foreign discussions about Ukraine. So maybe until next winter, so everyone is going to forget about some kind of need to do something to prevent another blackouts, which might be more harmful than they were this winter. So can you elaborate a bit here? So is something is being done to prepare to another winter season to secure Ukraine's, electricity grid around the country from another possible missiles attack on it?
Of course, measures are taken. What I mentioned was the possible deficit this summer is that since the winter, around half of Ukrainian energy infrastructure was affected or damaged or somehow attacked by Russian missiles. According to estimates of our energy specialists, 70% of that was repaired or in a state of repair, but still some additional repairs are needed and are ongoing. For example, 4 out of 9 energy blocks at the nuclear power stations in Ukraine are right now under maintenance. Recently, on the June 1st, one of them has already got out of this maintenance process, so it's now generating electricity again. But there are also some energy blocks at the heating power stations that also require maintenance. And all of this creates a possibility that Ukraine will have a deficit of around 1 gigawatt of energy, and probably more in July, 1.7, 1.8 of gigawatts of energy, which is, by estimates, it's around from 7 to 23% of energy consumption in Ukraine. It's a big number. And right now we expect that Ukraine will cover it by means of importing electricity. And also we heard from the Ukrenergo, this is the Ukrainian energy supply company, a plea to Ukrainians to limit their consumption in the evening peak hours so that the energy companies will be able to to generate enough electricity. And also to cover the cost of maintenance, recently there was an increase in energy tariffs in Ukraine since June 1st, I think. The tariff increased by 70%. Again, a big number, but I should just say that we didn't see any tariff increases for many years, basically. So it's this increase is first long overdue because it's below the cost efficiency rate. It doesn't cover the cost of producing energy. And also the companies, as I said, need additional funds to finance the maintenance and repairs.
Thank you for exhaustive explanation in this regard. And having these domestic factors explained, I would like to address Professor Alden. Chris, when it comes to speaking about global implications of interruption or destruction of normal supply chains and economic ties, everyone actually speaking about food security, because it was very elegant example last year when the sea export of Ukraine's wheat and other grain was severely restricted and blocked. So the world was at the risk of huge food crisis. But maybe there are other fields and there are other, let's say, issues which are important to keep in mind when we think about global implications of this crisis caused by the aggression and dysfunction of serious dysfunction of a significant share of Ukrainian economy. What comes to your mind when you speak or when you think about global implications of this war waged on Ukraine?
Thanks very much. I mean, the first perhaps, or the additional implications were inflationary pressures, which linked to the sharp spike in energy prices. So that was a very obvious global spillover into that sector, and certainly developed and developing countries around the world continue to suffer from the high rates of inflation, which are not just brought about in the food sector, the agriculture spillover in food sector. So I think that and the uncertainty around that accompanies that. So that's, I think, one of the global implications. The cost of borrowing has gone up. That means that it's difficult. It produces pressures on GDP growth and the like, and lending becomes more expensive. One of the big problems to face, of course, facing Ukraine in the immediate aftermath of the termination of conflict, of the war ending, will be the debt overhang. And how do you grow your way out of debt in a scenario where you have to, concurrent with that, you have to work on rebuilding. So I think that this is a regional challenge, and in certain sectors has global implications, as you've suggested. So I think this has to be on the front burner of the international community as they approach a Ukraine moving towards reconstruction from the war economy to the economy, the post-war economy. And I think that I think concessional loans have to continue. Special debt forgiveness has to be a part of that. You have also a whole set of array of macroeconomic measures that external actors can contribute, even if it puts pressure on their own economies and their own borrowing pressures. So I think that we have a setting where Ukraine's success has to be part of the solution for resolving some of the disequilibrium in sectors in the global economy and macroeconomically as well. So I think that's, to me, very important.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Filip, continuing the issue and the topic of reconstruction. So We are actually 1 week before another huge recovery and reconstruction conference, which will be held in London. It will be the second attempt of that level, let's say, after the conference in last year in Lugano. And actually, one of the issues which is not very clear in discussions when it comes to these reconstruction plans, what is the content of the reconstruction? Are we just calculating the damages which arose from how many enterprises, facilities, and other industrial and other types of social capacities Russia destroyed in Ukraine? Or we should plan just more broadly, maybe not all the enterprises, for instance, which were destroyed have to be rebuilt in that way that they existed before the war. Or maybe the approach of the government should be actually at least to restore, to rebuild what was destroyed. What is your take on this? What should be the priorities when it comes to planning reconstruction? And what should be the pillars of this vision? What Ukraine should rebuild when it comes to planning future?
Maria, you know that like when the government, but also non-governmental actors like Kyiv School of Economics and its partners, including our center, like when we mention some figures, it is mainly for the purposes to understand the scale of damages and the scale of losses, so that you could plan accordingly. And like currently, like we speak about the size of damages of like approximately $150 billion, and only direct damages related to destruction of Kakhovska hydroelectric station and its dam could be estimated at over $2 billion, just damages without losses. And the lost water, for example, will have enormous impact both on agriculture and industry. And then when we look on losses on those monies that economic agents lost because they were not able to operate their assets, and then we look on demining, for example, as additional way to prevent additional losses by agricultural companies, for example, then like we have figures that could be twice as high. So generally, just for the purposes of scale, then like you could have this build back better approach. We have calculations done by the World Bank within our DNA study, and like they have like well-proven figures that could be used. But the biggest issue currently is not like a philosophical approach to reconstruction, in my opinion. It is lack of real money. Like when you mentioned the Lugano conference, like I could recall like some anecdotal case, but very shocking, when like everybody started speaking about hundreds of billions of dollars for Ukrainian reconstruction a year ago. I was talking on the sidelines with different officials, and one of them told me that like the only real project funded to date, like approved to date by international partners, was a $40 million project by the World Bank to fund procuring construction materials for those residents of the occupied areas that were ready to rebuild their houses themselves. So like you could compare the scale. Like for this year, an estimate that is the sort of agreed between the government and the World Bank is approximately $14 billion. But within this figure, like only up to half already has funding, and now we have June. And from this half of the funding, half is Ukrainian, which is which is half of profits of the National Bank of Ukraine for 2022, and also confiscated assets of the state-owned Russian banks in Ukraine. So unfortunately, like besides US fund, like some US funding, some World Bank funding, some funding from other bilateral partners like Japan, etc. Sometimes even not even in money, but in like some equipment, etc. Like we are not speaking at all about dozens of billions. We speak only about billions. The biggest issue I believe we need to start talking right now is that we have like now in more than a year after the occupation of first large areas in the north of Ukraine, we need to speak sincerely about lack of taxpayers at developed countries to fund these hundreds of billions of dollars. And I should say that it is also like reasonable, because like why should they spend these hundreds of billions of dollars of their money on rebuilding the country that was destroyed by Russians? And then we go to the issue of Russian assets. And like we know about like at least $300 billion of Russian assets, and now we already more or less know where these assets are. And I could ask you like to look, for example, on one blog at FT website, like where Marcin Sangbu just like on weekend wrote about like approaches to this, like to finding and like using these assets. And like now European Commission started speaking about using at least the interest, and like mostly interest, because like these assets were mostly invested into government bonds of G7 countries, like if we speak about like those assets that were frozen. So even like confiscation and giving Ukraine this interest could be in the region of like at least dozen of billions of dollars per year. So at least it is the figures that is comparable to this annual needs. But also like what like even if we agree to the issue with taking Russian assets and just confiscation them, that it is really a very serious legal issue of like confiscation, the sort of like private property. Then like another ideas are on the table, like for example securitizing this frozen Russian assets, and like for example exchanging them into newly issued Ukrainian bonds that will be given to Russia in exchange for their assets. Like what is the difference, like for example, between US treasury bills and Ukrainian treasury bills? Like both are government bonds. Like I'm speaking like very broadly, like for sure. But like this idea, like for example, was introduced by a well-known financial expert who works on Ukraine for decades, Timochesh from Blue Bay Asset Management. So we need to find real sources of money, because like we could discuss, Mariia, and like you are an expert on Ukraine, and like you hear like this reconstruction all the time, and like let's discuss procedures, let's discuss transparency, let's discuss like how not to steal money, let's discuss like whether we will rebuild in line with new Le Corbusier type plans of the perfect city, or we will just rebuild it as it was in Soviet times, or we will build like some new Warsaw, for example. But like the main issue now is really lack of money. So we need to speak sincerely about like money in the short term, like certainly government money, but then we need to speak about like by government money I mean like Western taxpayers' money. But like the next step and very fast step should be like using proceeds from Russian assets, but also Russian assets themselves. But certainly like the second issue and the last issue like in this contribution on my side is really the issue of low absorption capacity on the Ukrainian side, not even the issue of like corruption, etc., or misuse or inefficient use or ineffective use, but like mainly lack of absorption capacity at all. Because like you're not speaking about like buying buses for Kiev city. We speak about like small settlements in the occupied areas where nobody in local governments speaks English, never had the experience with working with international donors. So we need training, we need additional human capital, and like we see now already in Kyiv that like there are a lot of vacancies in all technical assistance projects, all consultancies working with issues related to the war, related to rebuilding, etc. So we need like also like Ukrainian talents abroad, like students, PhD students, professionals who migrated before to start working, and like also people who understands like what is Ukraine, has previous experience with Ukraine, to take part in it. Plus also like some sort of like twinnings, like as it was during EU accession of Central and Eastern European countries, both twinnings between countries, like for example Polish regional experts who know how to attract and use EU funds for regional development, helping like Ukrainian experts, but also within Ukraine, like people from Lviv, for example, who have experience of working with EBRD, like helping people in Kherson, like how to get money from international development banks. Thank you.
Thank you for this broad perspective, because really when it comes to reconstruction plans, we used to think globally, but when it comes to implementation, which goes lower on a local level, so other issues and concerns arise. Chris, continuing this topic with reconstruction, what do you think? Should we expect that some actors like who are not very active as of now with their interests, that they will appear and will be more visible and will be pushing stronger for their participation in reconstruction of Ukraine? Actors like China, who is making, for instance, the first steps in offering its role for diplomatic settlement of the conflict on the one hand, but we'll understand that China is, first of all, a huge economic power. And it will be an illusion to think that they are not interested to step in and participate in that. This is one question. And if I may just, not to interrupt you later, I will put the second one. What I notice in the discussions about Ukraine's reconstruction here in UK, or even when it comes to US or continental Europe, there is a misunderstanding of who is going to have a priority, who should have a priority, because private business in countries which are supporting Ukraine, they are pushing for having more preferences and having a priority when some reconstruction projects will be started in Ukraine. While interests of local actors and businesses in Ukraine, which are surviving, and is also understandable, because they asking, okay, we are having financial support from our foreign partners, but how Ukrainian economy will be sustainable and self-sufficient again, if not Ukrainian business will have a priority to participate in reconstruction, but again, someone from abroad will come, implement some project and leave. So how do you see how to find the balance with this interest of different actors? And question on China.
Okay, can I answer them in the reverse order? And
of
first
course.
answer this one, and then go to China. I mean, I think it's imperative. Growth that is defined, or in investment into, or in a particular sector of reconstruction that is dominated by external actors who have resources, capabilities, and are in effect developing their building their business model on taking the resources that ought to be sunk into local actors who, as you say, have local knowledge, have skills, have weathered the war economy, the war period, and are still in need of fresh infusions of cash, new technology that might be available and the like. Partnerships have to be the way, and there has to be a comprehensive position within Ukraine. I think this would be how I do. I've seen it in other post-conflict reconstruction approaches, which is to say that every deal, insofar as it can, in every sector, has to have a local partner, and there has to be a logic to that. It isn't just tagging them on, right? But it's rather giving, transferring skills, or enabling their skills to develop further through new techniques, management techniques, or reinvestment into those firms. So I think that this is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, it's a very one-way kind of, it's a lost opportunity, and a one-way sort of spike in infrastructure growth. So this has implications for the reason I wanted to answer it in reverse is because it does have implications for what is the classic Chinese approach to building infrastructure, one that has been reliant on bringing its firms in, using its development finance to underwrite growth, a given project, let's say building a dam or building a bridge or this sort of thing. And it's typically, but not exclusively, it's typically gone in and said, we can do it quickly. You want to have that brief window that comes before, at the end, the goodwill window, as it were. The war is ending, and the population is relieved, and you want to restore the different components of the economy working well. So that brief window, we can deliver that quickly, but we do so without by using our factor resources in order to achieve that. So the Chinese way typically has been like that, and governments that in reconstruction, post-conflict reconstruction, have had to balance, the degree to which they have to negotiate and insist that there's a local component to this build, that there are partnerships being developed with local companies or what have you, as opposed to just receiving on the receiving end of the rebuild. China, of course, was the largest in 2019, was the largest trading partner, right, as a single country, and it's had an interest and a position in the agricultural sector. It does big infrastructure. It's something that the EU, that countries within the EU have done, but really China has sort of unashamedly been the country that thinks big and has the financial resources, the capacity to build big. So there's an attraction there, and you would say there is a potential meeting of the minds. You're very right. I would say the same thing, that the path is being smoothed for this sort of involvement in the post-war economy through the peace negotiations, that these peace negotiations will build the bona fides, the goodwill that is necessary to take a de facto position of support for Russia and transfer it into a support for peace, right? And therefore lay the foundation for greater economic engagement. I mean, there are going to be some sort of red lines here. There's going to be, to what extent is China to be involved in the economy that way? The other component, and I'll stop, I'm going on too long on this topic, but is that in a global environment, in an environment of great power competition, where the EU is very conscious, you can see it in the Balkans. The EU has been increasingly concerned, and other countries in the EU or in the periphery of the EU, concerned about Chinese investment in a given critical infrastructure, one way or the other. Will the possibility and presence of China trigger an EU reaction such that, or a US reaction such that they would step in and make a better offer, if I can put it that way? So I think that, being conscious of that environment at this stage is important. It's a world that's different from pre-2019.
Thank you, Chris. And now, just from this global perspective, I would like to go back to the event which happened just recently. and which happened on the ground in Ukraine, but will have tremendous global outcomes and impact, not only for Ukrainian economy on the one hand, but also long-term effect on Ukraine's ability to be part of international, for instance, food market. I mean the explosion, the blown up of Kakhovska Dam, of Kakhovska hydroelectric station, the plant. Actually, I think that the understanding of long-term consequences, not only for Ukraine, but for the region and for economic ties, for export capacities of Ukraine, is extremely underestimated at this point. That's why the reaction of the world community to actually majority, I would dare to say, to majority of Ukrainians seem to be too weak, taking into account how serious the consequences of this act, of this terrorist act, I would even say, is. Irina, can you please elaborate a bit why this event should be considered as extremely important for Ukrainian economy, for our capacities to produce, especially when it comes to agriculture, to export? What other not seen consequences should we keep in mind when it comes to this significant change on the ground?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, the first major consequence is that it's a humanitarian and ecological disaster for the southern part of Ukraine. As for its effects on economy, I would go by sector. First effect is on the energy sector. You mentioned the dam belongs to the Kakhovska hydropower plant, which wasn't working. It wasn't producing electricity to the Ukrainian energy mix, but still the dam and the water reservoir by the dam were used by the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. The water was also used for melioration purposes to produce fruits and vegetables in the south of Ukraine, and the water was also used by industrial plants to produce steel and other products. Right now, we don't have very concrete estimates as to the effect, but systems that were damaged, they provided water to 500,000 hectares, and in 2021, Ukraine gathered around 4 million tons of grain and oil products. So this is a big contribution to Ukrainian economy. And the Ukrainian Ministry of Ecology, it says that the consequences can be very, very dire for these lands. We may, if we don't intervene, then we may see even some deserts in place of the fields that we previously had. Another effect is on the transportation sector of Ukraine. The blown up dam was on the Dnieper River, which before the war was developing its river transportation system, and it was a very important link in the transportation of grain products to seaports. So with dropping level in the Dnieper River, now the navigation in the lower part of the Dnieper River is almost impossible, and even in the upper part of Dnieper River, it will be very difficult. So we have effect on this sector as well.
Thank you, Irina. And one follow-up question. Actually, this refers not basically to Kakhovska Dam explosion, but basically to the grain deal which you were talking about previously. You elaborated broadly why that the deal isn't actually functional at this moment, and if we to the extent it was expected. But do you expect that how situation will evolve here? Because it's definitely clear that Ukrainian, not only Ukraine is restricted to export anything from its seaports now, but also Russia, who last year stole the harvest, the absolute majority of the harvest of Ukraine in south of Ukraine, in Kherson region and Zaporizhia region, and actually sent this, sold this stolen harvest like Russian one to international market. So this year, because of the Kakhovska Dam explosion, there will be no possibility even for Russia unoccupied territories to accomplish the harvest season, let's say. So should we expect that Ukrainian grain and wheat and oilseeds will be share on international market will be decreased even more than it was last year?
Can you please repeat the question? I have unstable internet.
Should we expect that this year the share of Ukrainian wheat, grain, oilseed will be decreased to even more than it was last year? Because not only Ukrainian export facilities are restricted because Russian part of joint coordination center in Istanbul simply doesn't approve the movement of the ships from Ukrainian seaports, but also Russia will not be able to gather the Ukrainian harvest on occupied territories and sell it like they did last year.
Actually, Maria, I don't expect that the effect on the grain exports will be that huge, because the territories affected, they weren't primarily used to grow grain. They were used to grow fruits and vegetables. So the biggest effect would be on the Ukrainian internal market. We can expect to see rising prices on major vegetables and fruits. But as for the international trade, Ukraine, as I already told, its major products are sunflower oil, sunflower seeds, grain, wheat, maize, and other products. And those areas used to grow these products were not affected very much. Of course, we will see consequences in the longer period, but as for the immediate effect of this year, I don't expect to see much. But what I can say as the effect on Russia and on territories occupied by Russia, definitely Crimean Peninsula will get less water this year than it had last year when Russia opened the Crimean Channel.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for explanation. Chris, I have another question to you. You mentioned that even after the end of this active warfare phase, Western partners of Ukraine should probably continue giving loans and budgetary and financial support to Ukraine. But speaking not maybe economically, but politically, how should Western governments continue their communication with their own publics, explaining that this support to Ukraine should be long-term one? Because I'm not economist, for instance, and I see how seriously Russia is doubling down since maybe winter on informational campaigning. We are secondary hands and people who are not affiliated possibly directly with Russia, but there is a huge information campaign doubling down on the fact that West should stop at some point this support to Ukraine. And by this, maybe they count on decrease of wide public support in Western partners of Ukraine. How should governments work with their own audience? How UK, where the support to Ukraine is extremely high among local population, how to sustain this public support, explaining that even at the cost somehow of taxpayers in partner states, the support to Ukraine will be of strategic importance for Western governments as well?
It's a very good question. I think this is, and indeed, already the even political forces in, for instance, the United States are making arguments, should they be elected, of reducing the support already provided to, or future support provided to Ukraine. Part of it is you have to look at the nature of the arguments there. If moral suasion, if it's about you know, the invasion, the atrocities committed, the territory, you know, all of those sort of moral outrage component, this sort of thing has a sort of life, if you like, life cycle. And so I think what one needs to do is be able to communicate that that in the aftermath of conflict, that really, if you were committed to supporting Ukraine in that phase, you have to be committed to the rebuilding. That these are other side of the coin, same coin, but other side. So I think this kind of argument needs to be made. I think that it needs to be also worked in partnership with Ukrainians who make that argument, are willing to come forward. Perhaps the diaspora, the current diaspora, or the refugee communities that are in different countries, take that and make that kind of argument in partnership with local communities and/or political actors. I think there has to be a focus on the media. Social media is a tool that, if not well used or neglected, will be used against you. One needs to have a command of that, right? To communicate one's message. I think that I'd be interested in linking up with the major, you know, sort of the Googles and those sort of operators who say they are committed to a balanced approach on this question. We'd like to see in partnership you work with. Their contribution can be in the information side. I'd like to see something more on that point. A last point, because I just wanted to get this out there. It's slightly different than what you were saying, but I think related. There's one message that has come across all political divides, is Ukrainian resilience, Ukrainian capacity to defy expectations, right? I know Philippe there had just said we need to see real money, not sort of this talked about money. And I think that Ukraine can very easily say, look, people talk about resilience, but we have real resilience. Now, what does real resilience mean in a post-war setting? It means that the same energy, the same commitment and the like can be put to the rebuilding of the society in ways that will surprise, in the same way that will surprise outsiders, right? That it has, and that I think that building on the sense of Ukraine's unexpected and very deep felt responses and reactions in Western societies would be a good narrative to help frame and build a kind of story of Ukraine as a kind of a future South Korea, if I can talk about a post-war economy that became extraordinary. You know, see, this extraordinary moment in war becomes an extraordinary moment in the building of the post-war era. So I think something like that needs to be done. Thank
you, Chris. Philippe, you mentioned in your introductory remarks that one of the challenges or concerns you see is that to try to attract Ukrainian refugees maybe back, at least some part of them, because Ukraine really is in need of taxpayers or even labor force when it comes to specific sectors. Do you see any rational response to this challenge, actually, or the best way to secure that people are coming back more massively than they were last year or this year is to reach some significant advances on the ground with the occupation of Ukraine's territory, and that would be the best motivator to people to go back?
I think it should be the mix, like really, as you said, like security situation is key to many, and like the occupation, engine hostilities, because like the occupation itself doesn't mean security. Like for example, in Kiev, because like it could still be under Russian missile assaults. And it's also like it changes, it mutates, and like like before year ago we had like less explosions in Kiev, but weaker air defense. Now we have much stronger air defense, but it doesn't mean that you like could not be killed by debris of drone or missile. So security is very important to many, and like you need like Ukrainian policymakers, Western policymakers should also take this into account, and in like strategic planning process, in also like understanding like the social demographic structure of refugees. Like we know that mainly they are children and mothers, like women aged 25 to 49 as like groups in the survey, and approximately on one adult we have 1.07 child. So it means that school year is an important like the sort of technical date, end of school year, beginning of the new school year. Like summer is a time when many will make decisions whether to return or to stay for another year, and after staying for one more year in foreign school, probabilities that the person will be integrated in the new country will be much higher. So like when we speak about like non-security remedies, like certainly like why I was so focused on the issue of getting money fast and rebuilding as fast as possible, because like when we look on the survey data and we assess commission the survey and like published a report based on the survey data, we have very like all refugees are different, and there are refugees that are ready to go back to Ukraine, but they could not because, like for example, they lived and then like you have a range of like they lived in Bakhmut and certainly they have no place to return, or they lived in Irpin and certainly or in Bucha and they could return, and to return they need their house being rebuilt or money given to them to rebuild it. They need critical infrastructure to be rebuilt, and they need jobs. So like for example, their employer should get some resources and maybe insurance to rebuild the production facilities. So having jobs, having a place to live, having critical infrastructure is of utmost importance. And also, I believe that European Union, and we know that like two biggest countries in terms of number of refugees are Germany and Poland, and like the third is Czech Republic. In Czech Republic, the share of Ukrainians to the local population is the highest. Like EU should start thinking about, in fact, introducing de facto freedom of movement of Ukrainians even before Ukraine becomes a full-fledged member of the EU, because like on one side it looks counterintuitive, like why it should be like why European Union should make it easier for Ukrainians to travel and to start working and to live in the European Union, but on another side, like understanding that like you could return to Ukraine and especially after the war ends, and you could go back anytime in the future to, if you have a good job offer in the EU country, even before Ukraine becomes a full-fledged member with freedom of movement, freedom of labor. It will be very important because like we know that it worked in Baltics, we know that it worked in Poland. As soon as the country started growing, economy started growing, like local workforce that decided to look for better jobs abroad in more developed countries started to go back to their country, and it was in peaceful times. And if we speak about like migration, like people who left because of atrocities of wars, and certainly it will be even easier for people because they have more emotional reasons to go back. So this is just like very obvious things that are on the surface. Like certainly this is an issue that should be worked on, but I'm sure that like it should not be just like having not enough attention, because like we know about the story of Bosnian wars, when Bosnian war, when like very high share of Bosnian refugees stayed in the countries that took them during the long war. Like we need not to allow the same to go to repeat in Ukraine, and certainly on the side of Ukrainian government, a lot has to be done as well, including like creating jobs in safer locations, helping in retraining, etc.
Thank you, Flip. Now I would like to address the people who are listening to us. If you have any questions to our speaker, just use the raised hand function in Zoom to make me see that someone is interested in asking any question, and we will unmute you for that. If not, while people are thinking, I will address Irina one more time. Irina, I know that your think tank is very conducting all the time different types of research following the situation, how Ukrainian business is surviving. It refers not only to the wartime, but you have long-lasting story of similar research. Not to go into details, but to say generally, how would you say what allow Ukrainian business to survive and to be more or less flexible and still maybe change the mode of their operation, but still to stay on the market when it comes to domestic businesses? And maybe you have a view on who was more flexible, like enterprises or businesses which were middle and large, or just small businesses who could maybe more flexible to some extent?
Thank you, Mariia. Let me start with the last question first. Who was more flexible? I would say that surprisingly, medium and larger businesses were more flexible because they had a bigger security pillow. Let's put it that way. They had more funds to spend to adapt to changing situation, whereas smaller enterprises, even though they are very quick to adapt to changes, they didn't have this additional financial help. The business surveys that our think tank conducts, they show that first of all, the Ukrainian business has been for this last year and a half extremely optimistic about its future, and they are optimistic not for a longer period, but on a shorter period of like 3 to 6 months. That's probably because they think that it can be any worse. That's also an option, but also because they know ways to adapt. We ask them what's the biggest challenges, and of course, with the course of the war, some issues gain more importance, like during winter, attacks on energy infrastructure and limitations as to energy supplies were the most important issues. Inability to use the traditional logistic routes were also a very big challenge for Ukrainian businesses, but still the business expects to increase production in the future. We see reports that the businesses found new partners in the European countries. Some businesses relocated to safer areas and were able to open their subsidiaries in western parts of Ukraine and find new markets there. These are just some success stories, not overwhelmingly, but we do see those stories. With bigger businesses, the relocation to western parts is not that widespread, because it's difficult for them to find in new markets the new place. They have their suppliers in the old place and their customers there, so usually we see that they can open branches, but the main production they still do in the eastern part.
Thank you. And for the last couple of minutes of this discussion, Chris, I will give the floor to you. Having this like broader perspective on what's going on, are you more optimistic or pessimistic about short-term and mid-term perspective?
You mean in terms of the economy per
Yes.
se? Or yeah. I think all the hardship is now. This is the period of hardship, and this is the period where risk and uncertainty remain daily features, and so decision making is always upended by circumstances that change. The dam is the bursting of the dam, is the sabotage of the dam is yet another example. I think the medium term, however, that is to say, as the Ukraine emerges from conflict, from war, has its territory restored, we can see that kind of, as I said a moment ago, that sort of resilience. And what I liked about Irina's examples there, I know they're anecdotal. I know that we always have to look carefully at anecdotes as opposed to larger trends. But that being said, the number of places that in war, the Bosnias or otherwise type of conflicts, that couldn't even draw on anecdotes such as that, where people were thinking in this sort of way, is a great measure of distinction for Ukraine. So in the medium term, I see, strong possibilities of growing out of this, of innovation, repurposing the slogan of Build Back Better and turning it into something that is a Ukraine Build Back Better. So yeah, I'm quite positive in the medium term.
Thank you. Because when I was putting this question, I thought that if your expectations in midterm perspective would be pessimistic, that would be a very sad result of this discussion. But thank you for the logical for this logic chain of explanations. I think we had a great combination of both expertise on domestic issues, regional perspective, and global. I'm really happy that all of you agreed to participate in this discussion. And after we published all these events, all these recordings on YouTube, we have incrementally growing number of views. And even today, before the event, I've got a couple of messages from US and from Australia where people asked to share the YouTube because they have a different time there, and they are gonna view it later. So thank you from the bottom of my heart as moderator. It was pleasure to me to navigate this discussion. I hope I did. It was a pleasure for you to participate as well. So let me thank you, Irina Kose, Chris Alden, and Gleb Vyshlinsky. So as soon as we publish the recording, I will share with all of you, and I will share on all social media of myself, International Relations Department at LSE. So we will promote it afterwards as well. So thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good evening and keep safe. For this refers to Irina and Gleb, who are in Ukraine right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.